Okay, so this soliloquy by Macbeth is part of Act 1, Scene 7. And at this point in the play, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have had their conversation. King Duncan has now arrived at Macbeth's castle for the night. And if you go back to Macbeth and Lady Macbeth's conversation, Lady Macbeth has persuaded him to kill King Duncan. And even though Macbeth is not really involved in the planning, he also has not told her that he would not go through with it. So he is kind of just going along with Lady Macbeth's plan to murder King Duncan. And she said in Act 1, Scene 5, she said, you just go and look normal, act normal, leave everything else to me. I will come up with a plan. So in this soliloquy, Macbeth is considering all the different reasons that he should not murder King Duncan. And so what I want you to do, and this is a reading technique that you guys really need to start looking at, how to break down complex texts, especially when they're really long like this. So what I've done is I've done it for you, but this should make it very easy for you to go through and for you to read and understand his different reasons of why he should not kill King Duncan. So what I want you to do is I'm just going to tell you when to pause every so often, and I want you to go through and see if you can figure out the 4 reasons. So let's look at part 1, where he says, if this business would be finished when I did the deed. And I want you to read that portion, and I want you to try to highlight maybe 1 or 2 things that help you see the reason that he does not want to murder King Duncan. So pause the video, go to your document, try to highlight 1 or 2 things that tell you this first reason. All right, so hopefully you were able to find it on your own. I'm going to highlight consequences because that's a word that shows us that that's the reason he thinks, that's one reason he thinks he shouldn't kill King Duncan, is the consequences. Now, if you go back to this first little bit, then you see that's what he's thinking about the consequences. He just basically says, if it could be finished whenever I actually murdered King Duncan, then everything would be good. But he's worried about the consequences. All right, so now pause the video. Go to the second reason, and I want you to highlight the second reason that Macbeth feels he should not murder King Duncan. So pause the video. Once you highlight your thing, come back to it and I'll go over. So the second reason, the key word that I'm going to highlight here is punishments. He says there are still punishments in this world. And then if you go on and you look at his details there, he is saying that, whenever I commit this crime, it's teaching people what to do. And if it's teaching, and he says our students, then he says that punishment will come back to plague us teachers. And whenever he says us teachers, that includes him, right? Okay, so first thing is the consequences. The second reason is the punishments. So now I want you to go on to the third, and I want you to pause the video, see if you can find the third reason he believes he should not murder King Duncan. So this third reason, he gives a reason, but then he gives 2 examples. And his reason is that the king trusts him in 2 ways. But now let's look at what are those 2 ways. He says he's his kinsman and his subject. So, we're related, plus Macbeth is a thane underneath King Duncan. And then the second thing is that he's the host. And the host is supposed to be protecting the people who are staying under his roof. So his third reason is I should be protecting him, or instead of actually doing it myself. And look at what he says. I should be closing the door in his murderer's face, not trying to murder him myself. So he's saying, I'm his kinsman and his subject, plus I'm his host. I should be protecting him. He trusts me. All right, so let's move on to the fourth thing, and just pause the video, read through the fourth reason, and then highlight what you think his fourth reason is. All right, so one thing that you probably can get from this is that Duncan has been such a humble leader, so free of corruption. So what he's saying there is King Duncan has been a good king. And because he's been a good king, what's going to happen is that people are going to be upset. And so if he's been a good king, and I'm even going to write that over here, he's been a good king. And because he's been such a good king, people are going to be upset and they're going to want to know what happened to him. So if you look at this soliloquy by Macbeth, I've kind of put over here on the right-hand side the reasons that he goes through in his soliloquy. So he is standing on stage, and we know that the murder is getting near because King Duncan's only staying there for that one night. And so we know that it's about to happen. So Macbeth is sitting there and he's thinking to himself, I'm worried about the consequences of this. And then there's going to be punishment that's going to come back to me. Plus, King Duncan trusts me, and he's been a good king. So he's going through all the reasons of why he should not murder King Duncan. Now, this last part down here, he says, I can't spur myself to action. And whenever he uses the word spur right here, think about what do you use on the back of a boot to kick the horse? And that's what makes the horse go. So he's saying, I can't make myself go do this. The only thing motivating me is ambition. And I'm going to highlight that because if you go back to our discussion before we started reading, and we talked about ambition. Is ambition always a good thing? So right here, Macbeth is saying, the only thing motivating me to kill King Duncan is my ambition, which makes people rush ahead of themselves toward disaster. So he is saying, I have nothing to make me do this besides my ambition. So this starts to get into that question of, is ambition always a good thing? So we're going to start looking at ambition. And the fact that Macbeth has ambition to become king. All right, so we're going to move on away from the soliloquy. So I've scrolled down to this part with this discussion between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So Lady Macbeth has entered the room. Our first part was just Macbeth alone. Now Lady Macbeth is here. Now let's look at what Lady Macbeth and Macbeth say to each other. Now this is really important. Macbeth says, we can't go on with this plan. So what is he doing? He's trying to back out, right? So Macbeth is going to back out of the plan. He doesn't want to kill King Duncan. He says, the king has honored me. I've earned good opinion. I want to enjoy these honors. And so he doesn't want to actually go ahead and kill King Duncan. He wants to enjoy the honors that he's been given and rightfully been given. Then look at Lady Macbeth's reaction. I'm going to go in with black and red and going back and forth. She says, were you drunk when you seemed so hopeful before? Have you gone to sleep and woke up green and pale in fear of idea? So I actually want to go over to the way that Shakespeare writes it. She says, was the hope drunk whereon you dressed yourself? Has it slept since? So when she says, where is the hope that you had drunken? Has it slept since then? And then it wakes now to look so green and pale at what it did so freely. All right, so I want to look at right here. She's saying, where is the hope? Has it slept since then? And now it's green and pale, so it's sick. So the fact that she says, where's the hope? Where's the hope? Has it slept since then? Is it sick? So is hope a person? Can it sleep? Can it be sick? No. So what is this called? Whenever she's talking about hope being sleeping and waking up and being sick, this is personification. All right, so we've got some personification here with hope. All right. So then I'm going to come back over to the modern version, and she says, will you take the crown you want so badly, or will you live as a coward, always saying, I can't, after you say I want to? You're like the poor cat in the old story. So the old story is that the poor cat wanted a fish, but it didn't want to wet its paws to get some. So whenever she's using this simile, she's saying, okay, so you're like the cat in the story that wanted the fish but didn't want to wet its paws to get some. So let's look at the comparison. So you've got the cat that wanted the fish, but it didn't want to wet its paws to get some. So what is she trying to say about Macbeth? So the cat is Macbeth. And just like the cat wanted the fish, what does Macbeth want? He wants the crown. Or you can even say he wants to be king. But just like the cat will not wet its paws to get the fish, Macbeth will not kill King Duncan to get the crown. So you can see the simile there that Shakespeare gives us through Lady Macbeth. Okay? Let's look at this last little bit of what Lady Macbeth says. First let's look at Macbeth. He says he's wanting to do what is proper for a man to do. But then Lady Macbeth basically says, well, when you said you would do it, that's when you were a man. So let's look at where she says that. When you dared to do it, that's when you were a man. Ooh, so she's basically saying if you're not going to go through with this, you're not a real man. And she says if you're going to go one step further, then you'll be that much more of a man. So she's basically saying, you know, if you're going to go through with this, then you're a man. And if you're going to go a step further, then you're even more of a man. So she's really challenging his manhood. So she's challenging his manhood. All right. So let's move on. She has one more thing that she wants to say. I need to scroll down so you can see it. All right, so the last thing that I want to bring up about what Lady Macbeth says up here, she says, I have suckled a baby. So what that means is she's nursed a baby. And she knows how sweet it is to love the baby at my breast. So she's saying, I've nursed babies and I know how sweet they are. But if I had sworn to do that the same way you've sworn to this, so I'm skipping this part here because I want to point out what she's saying. So she says, I know how sweet it is to nurse a baby. But if I had sworn to do something, I would go through with it. Even if, as the baby were smiling up at me, I would have put my nipple out of its mouth and smashed its brains out against the wall. So this shows how, I'm going to use the word crazy, how crazy she is, that she's willing to kill a baby as it's sweet and nursing if she had sworn to do it, as you have sworn. So she's basically saying, if I would have sworn to you that I would do something, I would go to the extreme of killing a baby if I had sworn. So we're seeing how intense she is. And she's basically telling him, if I had sworn to you that I would do something, I would do it. But you're backing out. All right, so this next part of their discussion, Macbeth is afraid that they fail. He says, what if we fail? And that's what he's worried about. You're really starting to see through his soliloquy in this part, you're starting to see that Macbeth is more concerned with the consequences. He's more concerned with being caught. But let's look at Lady Macbeth's plan. So she says, I have a plan. And so here's the plan. Remember, she was in charge of coming up with a plan. Macbeth just needed to look normal. So she says, when Duncan is asleep, she's going to give his servants drunk. So she's going to give his servants drink. She's going to get them drunk so that their memory will go up in smoke through the chimneys of their brains. And when they lie asleep like pigs, so drunk, what can you and I not be able to do against the unguarded body of Duncan? So, what is the plan? The plan is to get the guards drunk, to get his servants, his guards drunk, and then they're going to, and this is on the next page, they're going to blame the drunken servants. So let's put that down there. So the plan is, King Duncan's going to be asleep, they're going to get the guards or the servants drunk, and then they're going to blame the murder on them. So that is her plan that she's come up with. So it's not just going to be that they murder King Duncan and try to just leave it up for everyone to find out. There's actually going to be someone to take the fall. All right. Now let's look at this last little bit of Act 1, Scene 7. So Macbeth says, give only birth to male children because your fearless spirit should create nothing that isn't masculine. And look at this part right here. He says, once we have covered the two servants with blood and used their daggers to kill, won't people believe they were the culprits? All right, so we're going to start looking at what's called a motif at this point. And a motif is an image or something that is seen, some type of image or symbolism that you see throughout. Let's see that. It's the other word. So it's just something that you see throughout a play, and it's starting to give us some insight. So the motif here is going to be blood. And blood is going to symbolize guilt. So just like they're going to take King Duncan's blood and cover the servants with their blood, they are covering those servants with guilt. Aren't they going to believe that they're the guilty culprits? So we're going to be looking at this motif as we read. It's not just this one time. We're going to see it over and over again. All right, and then Lady Macbeth says, who would think otherwise? And look at Macbeth. He says, now I'm decided, and I will exert every muscle in my body to commit this crime. Okay, so he came in saying we're not going through with this, but Lady Macbeth says, if I had promised to do this, then I would do it. When you said you would do it, you're a man, you want to be king, but you don't want to do what it takes. And then by the time she finishes with him, Macbeth agrees to go through with the murder. So we see in this scene that Macbeth is trying to back out, but Lady Macbeth is able to convince him once again. And so Macbeth is about to go through with murdering King Duncan, even though he didn't really want to go through with it, but he is, and she's convinced him that it's a good idea. All right. So go ahead and finish up this scene and go back through, and you may want to read Act 1, Scene 7 with Shakespeare's version. You can find that audio on YouTube.